Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
definitely discussions have started.
Chicago's due for a new map of city wards. We check in on the drafting process.
Women and people of color are always held to a different standard. I understand that. I've known that my whole life.
Tensions are running high at City Council and the state gets a credit upgrade, plus much more in Spotlight Politics.
It's official. College athletes can get paid for their name, likeness, and image under a new Illinois law.
What the United States and other countries are doing to promote vaccine equity across the world.
The whole thing seemed like a giant puzzle.
Exploring the complicated history of Chicago's lakefront and how it could have turned out very differently.
Because you can.
And Broadway hits are coming back to Chicago. Theater critic Chris Jones has the latest, plus an update on his new role at the Tribune. But first, some of today's top stories. City Council is planning to convene a special meeting on Friday to address citywide violent crime. 19 council members have now invoked a rarely used provision of state law to hold this meeting and to call Police Superintendent David Brown to testify about the summer violence prevention strategy. If Brown doesn't show up, the group says they will vote on a no-confidence resolution. This is the second time alderpeople have called a special meeting in the Lightfoot tenure, and it will be held virtually. And we'll have much more on this coming up in Spotlight Politics. Public officials and dignitaries were on hand in Bronzeville today to dedicate a new sculpture to legendary black journalist and Chicagoan Ida B. Wells. The sculpture called Light of Truth was designed by Englewood-born Richard Hunt. It's located on the site of the former Ida B. Wells homes in Bronzeville and is said to be the city's first monument dedicated to an African-American woman.
But she found a home here in our city, in Chicago, and we claim her as our own. She came here making sure that she would have the necessary work to continue demanding change and advocacy on behalf of black people, and yes, she did.
And you can visit our website to watch our conversation with sculptor Richard Hunt. Former U.S. Defense Secretary and Chicago native Donald Rumsfeld has died. Rumsfeld's family says he was surrounded by family in Taos, New Mexico. And here he is on Chicago Tonight with John Calloway back in 1987. Rumsfeld served as the Secretary of Defense under the George W. Bush administration from 2001 to 2006, was one of the key architects of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Served in the same position from 1975 to 77 under President Gerald R. Ford. Rumsfeld was born in Chicago and grew up in Winnetka and is an alumnus of New Trier High School. He was 88 years old. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. The lines of power are set to shift at City Hall. In what is a complicated and often shrouded process that happens every 10 years after the U.S. Census, new ward maps must be drawn, and it could change the shape of the Chicago City Council. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more on where this process stands. Amanda, lots of remapping going on after the census.
Yeah, Brandis, it is a year for new maps everywhere. There's already a new map for Illinois House and Senate districts, and then the state legislature is in charge of drawing new congressional boundaries, but they're putting that duty off until fall. Chicago is under its own timeline, and in the case of the city, it is still relatively early. Still, Alderman Roberto Maldonado says things are happening.
Definitely discussions have started. At this point, we still do not have the map room. The city is in the process of acquisition of the software so that we can start drawing the potential maps that we all would want to have.
Now, beer aficionados may know Map Room as a longtime bar in Bucktown, but that is not what Maldonado means. Rather, this is a room, a space that is equipped with a computer, maybe a few. I don't know. I've never been in one. And that's really a big point in all of this because they are, per unofficial rule, closed to the public. But these are computers equipped with specialized map-making software. Now, the law does leave it to current members of Chicago City Council to draw future maps of wards that, of course, they may well be running in. Maldonado says older people are in early talks about what they want the outcome, what they want that map to look like. He's a member of the Latino caucus and says that there is a chance of picking up one, maybe two more wards that have a majority of Latino residents. He says the Latino caucus is determined to present a united front.
I'm going to be looking out first and foremost for the interest of the Latino community at large in the city of Chicago, so that we can really and truly get a fair map, not like we did 10 years ago. We were shortchanged 10 years ago by the previous mayor at the time, Mayor Emanuel. We would not allow that to happen again.
He says that he is going to engage with constituents, with local stakeholders as negotiations progress. And then when a map is drafted, the public will have a chance to give input. But there is a commission totally separate from the city council that is taking a more preemptive and more transparent approach. Last week, beginning holding a series of meetings, some virtual, others are going to be hybrid. All of these have a sign language and a Spanish interpreter option that is seeking public input on the new map. The Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission plans to use all of this public feedback coupled with census data once it arrives in mid-August to come up with a map proposal of its own. The group Change Illinois helped to organize this commission, and Chandra Van Dyke is the Chicago project manager.
We believe it should be an independent process where residents have some power in it, right? Some voice in it. Residents should be a part of this process, and it shouldn't be done in a back room that typically, that room doesn't involve every alder either, which means there is a lack of representation. There's a voice missing at the table when those decisions are being made for the greater public.
But just who is on this commission? She says that in the spring, some 430 people submitted applications to be part of it. And then leaders, and you can learn who on the website chicagoswards.org, picked 13. Van Dyke says they were chosen with a mindset toward reflecting Chicago's geographic, age, and racial diversity. And then the goal is to get a map drawn by fall, get more public input on it, make revisions, and then hope that at least 10 members of the city council will give it wings. A Portage Park resident was one of the few who gave public testimony at a virtual meeting held last night. Dan Butterworth says he lives in the 38th ward, but with so many other wards nearby, he says the various alder people who represent the area often pass the buck.
If I walk 2 blocks from my house or east, I'm actually in the 45th ward. A ward, I might add, is full of energy, vibrancy. If I walk 6 blocks south from there, I'm in the 36th ward. If I go 2 more blocks, I'm in the 30th ward. Unless, of course, I'm on the west side of the street. Then I'm actually in the 31st ward.
Van Dyke says that this is the sort of input from the public that should be taken into consideration.
And it is people who live in these spaces every day who knows boundaries and understands the territories in their communities and how their communities function. And that's why it's important to have their voices so that we don't put people in a situation where we're putting lines in the middle of their communities, which splinter things in a way that they can't come together and organize. They can't come together and get resources. They can't advocate for better things in their community because they have to go to 3, 4, 2 representatives who sends them in circles.
But Alderman Maldonado says that he has been in politics long enough to know that everyone has an agenda. He says map making should stay in under the city council's control, and he expects that alder people will reach a compromise on a new map before December.
I don't believe in independent commissions because independent commissions, by definition, should be independent. They won't be independent. Those members will be appointed by somebody. They will respond to somebody, and I'm not naive enough that there will really be people coming and being dropped from heaven into this so-called independent commission that nobody knows who they are, and they're going to come with the perfect ideal configuration of 50 wards.
Now, as I mentioned, going back to the state level, Illinois Democrats did pass a law that establishes new boundaries for state legislative districts, but it may not actually be the final map. It is facing 2 lawsuits. One is from Republicans, the other from the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. So we'll be watching that. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And now, Paris, back to you.
All right, thanks, Brandis. And it is official. As of tomorrow, under Illinois law, college athletes in this state can cash in on their name, likeness, and image. Yesterday, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Student Athlete Endorsement Rights Act, which passed the Illinois House and Senate with some bipartisan support. And just today, the NCAA handed down its own ruling that does allow college athletes to make money off of endorsements in states like Illinois that have passed legislation. And joining us to offer his perspective is one of the bill's sponsors, State Representative Cam Buckner, whose district covers several near North Side and South Side neighborhoods in Chicago. Representative Buckner, welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you, Paris.
So first of all, how will this law impact college athletes in Illinois?
So this law changes the entire college athletics landscape in the state of Illinois. What it does is that it allows our young student athletes across the board, both at public and private institutions, to be able to profit off of their own name, their own image, and their own likeness, which up until this point was prohibited by NCAA rule and by law.
And how lucrative could it be for college athletes? What kind of endorsements might we see from, let's say, a football player at Northwestern or a basketball player at the University of Illinois?
This has the ability and the opportunity to be extremely lucrative for players across the board in many sports, right? I think a lot of us are looking at this as a windfall for, as you said, the star quarterback or the star point guard. But what I also want to be sure that people realize that this also means that the young lady who's a tennis player at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, or Eastern Illinois University in Charleston has the ability to make money off of her name, likeness, and image as well. And that includes being able to give tennis lessons. It includes being able to endorse, let's say, the local pizzeria or the local cookie shop on campus. This is really about equity. It's about fairness and creating a level playing field that gives these young women and men the opportunity to compensate a fair market value off of their own image.
And as I understand in the Illinois law, there are limits to how an athlete in college can use use their likeness. Explain that.
We want to be very intentional about threading the needle, not just giving these young people the opportunity to compensate, but also protecting them from what may be unscrupulous actors or industries that may be detrimental to their own image, right? And so in the bill, we prohibit endorsements of certain things like alcohol, like cannabis, like gambling, things that we think that could, cause a problem for our student athletes, if not immediately down the line at some point.
And does this give universities and colleges in Illinois maybe a competitive advantage to attract and keep more top-tier athletes, if they decide to come to this state where this law is in place versus other states where it's not in place?
We truly believe so. We believe that this signals to student athletes at the prep level and at the collegiate level that we as a state are leaning forward and ready to put them in the best positions possible. As a 17-year-old high school football recruit looking at what college I was going to go to, if I had to choose, and this was one of the reasons that I got to choose what school I was going to and what state I was going to go to, this would actually be a huge factor in my decision 20 years ago.
And the NCAA, as we mentioned, came down with this ruling today, basically agreeing, saying, yes, it is okay for student athletes to make money off their likenesses in states like Illinois that have passed laws. How does the NCAA's decision impact Illinois?
It basically just tells us that we did the right thing. And while I'm excited that the NCAA has finally woken up and smelled the coffee, I think it's not enough. The NCAA is arriving at midnight to a party that started at 7:30, late. Not only late, they've come empty-handed. This is something that they should have addressed a long time ago. But the fact that state legislatures have had to do this really speaks volumes to the work that they refuse to do.
And as you know, NCAA as an organization makes billions of dollars, very lucrative television and radio deals, head coaches that make millions and millions of dollars while student athletes don't get paid. Is that something the Illinois legislature wants to take up, just sort of the further discussion on whether there should be some compensation for student athletes beyond just endorsements and making money off their likeness?
Paris, I think we have to have deeper and more intentional conversations about overall compensation for these young women and men who are huge revenue generators for schools across the state and across the country. I think what we saw last week in the Supreme Court's decision is that Justice Kavanaugh was very clear about the fact that the NCAA is really operating in murky water, and it appears that much of their business model may be predicated on antitrust and antitrust issues, right? So I think soon we'll see compensation come to the table. I think we'll have real conversations about that moving forward, but this was a step in the right direction.
Certainly an interesting debate, and I want to go back to something you said. So a tennis player that wanted to give tennis lessons to their local district, they couldn't do that under previous law?
Under previous law and under previous rules that have been set forth by the NCAA, anyone who is a scholarship athlete is not able to market their skills or to use once again, their name, likeness, and or image to make money. And so this is not just about advertising for Nike or advertising for the local car dealer or the local pizzeria. This is also for the golf or the tennis athlete who is unable on summer break to use their name, likeness, and image at the local country club to bring in a pretty small amount. We aren't talking about huge dollars, but a small amount of money in order to support themselves and sometimes their families.
All right, it's a very interesting debate, and obviously it goes on around the country. And our thanks to State Representative Cam Buckner. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paris.
And now to Brandis for a look at vaccine distribution around the world. Brandis.
Paris, about 46% of the United States population is fully vaccinated, but many countries have shown lagging vaccination rates. As the demand for vaccines wanes in the United States, President Joe Biden recently announced a plan to distribute vaccines worldwide.
We're taking a major step that will supercharge the global fight against this pandemic. In my direction, the United States will purchase an additional 500 million doses from Pfizer vaccine, that will donate nearly 100 low and lower middle income countries. They will be the beneficiaries.
Now joining us is Tom Hope, professor of cell and developmental biology at Northwestern University. Welcome, Professor Hope. So we know that President Biden's plan calls for distributing 200 million COVID-19 vaccines by the end of 2021, 500 million vaccines to be distributed by June 2022. And as he just said, that is to 92 countries with low to lower to middle income levels. Professor Hope, what more can the administration do?
I think that they have to try to come up with some creative ways to get this done. The problem is that we're talking about billions of people, and the numbers we were just talking about were up around 100 million or even 500 million. But we have to get this done quickly. We got to see this amazing display of how the vaccine stops the virus right here in the U.S. We've got to finish that job, but now we've got to vaccinate the world as soon as possible. This isolate, the Delta isolate variant is probably transmitting 10 times more efficiently than the original virus. And so if we let this virus have chances to mutate, it could start to evade the vaccine.
What areas of the world are lacking most in vaccination?
My understanding is that, for instance, in Africa, I think they have only vaccinated about 1 or 2%, and they're really struggling to even find places to try to get the vaccines if they can, find the resources to collect them. So I think that Africa is a place that it's been a bit of a blessing that the virus really hasn't taken off there. But we're unfortunately seeing the virus taking off in places where it didn't really get a hold over the past year, and so again, we just have to come up with ways to get the resources to get this done. We have to do it as a population.
What are your concerns, or what is causing the barriers in getting access to these vaccines for those countries?
I think part of it is just being able to produce enough. I think they are producing a lot, and I think that unfortunately, a lot of times it comes down to resources, it comes down to money, and really that should not be the question at this point. those are investments we have to make for the world, for ourselves. And we've got to get the other vaccines that are being developed and optimized online and out to people. There's a lot of work to be done.
What are your concerns about countries, as they fall behind in vaccinating against the virus, that the virus mutates even further as, we already know that the Delta variant is spreading?
Yep. So my primary concern is the variants that we're seeing. They pop up and they take over because they can run faster than the next virus, and they can sort of spread faster. They can overtake it, and that's sort of a pressure the viruses have with each other. As we roll out the vaccine, and the virus has a chance to bump into somebody that's vaccinated, but then also somebody else that isn't, and can start to try to go back and forth between a vaccinated individual and a non-vaccinated individual. That's the circumstances that can lead to a variant coming up that then sees it has an advantage and can infect vaccinated people.
What does this vaccination gap say about, the global public health inequities that exist?
I think it puts it on the table for all of us to see without any fancy dressings. This, unfortunately, has been something that's part of the world, maybe getting a little better, but during the pandemic, it was sort of very obvious. And I know myself, many people were hoping that some of the lessons we learned, we had a chance to stop and think, a chance to organize things better, make things more efficient, and we still have a chance to do that. And this could be a good reason to do it, but it just will be sad if we go back to some of the bad habits and unfortunate things that were common in our lives before the pandemic.
To that end, is this an opportunity to learn and therefore prevent this, this vaccination gap from happening with future global vaccination efforts?
I would answer to that is yes. This has been the most remarkable, eye-opening learning experience for someone who's been studying viruses for 30 years, because this is, to watch it all unfolding in real time is something else. And it's kind of amazing that we didn't know this virus existed, a year and a half ago, and the country is now vaccinated pretty much. We had to finish that job, but that is something that's quite remarkable. And what we learned from that is next time we'll be able to do better. So, but we have to stop these things early. There's a bunch of things you can do to keep it from becoming the big problem it became, and that's the things we have to learn.
Okay, a lot of work. Our thanks to Northwestern professor Tom Hope for joining us.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Up next, a new book on the complicated history of Chicago's lakefront. But first, a look at the weather. Chicago's lakefront is often referred to as one of the city's crown jewels. And as with many valuable things, it's been the subject of frequent high-profile political and legal fights. As Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports, a new history of Chicago's lakefront traces more than 150 years of nearly non-stop litigation.
Chicago's waterfront is renowned. The parkland and beaches, the lakefront trail, the relative lack of a major industrial presence. But those were never a sure thing.
Chicago's just darn lucky.
Attorneys and legal scholars Joseph Kearney and Thomas Merrill are authors of the new book Lakefront, which traces the development of its namesake back to 1852, when the city council went over a mayoral veto to let the Illinois Central Railroad lay track in the city alongside Lake Michigan.
What we now know as Grant Park was being washed away by the current of the lake. So from the very beginning, the railroad played a key role in the very preservation and development of the lakefront.
But the railroad also sparked immediate controversy among wealthy property owners on Tony Prairie and Michigan avenues. In the 1890s, a legal battle over the railroad's push to build an outer harbor gave us what's known as the public trust doctrine.
It's a commonly known, if not altogether understood, doctrine.
Essentially, it holds that the submerged land under Lake Michigan is too valuable a resource to sell off to a private owner and must be held in the public trust.
The public trust doctrine entered with a big bang, but then it pretty quickly entered into a period of what we call dormancy.
It got new attention from preservationists and park advocates around the time of the environmental movement of the 1970s.
It's become kind of the vehicle in recent decades to challenge various projects like the Lucas Museum or the Obama Presidential Center. The outcomes are very mixed. It's almost impossible to predict how the lawsuits are going to be resolved.
The book goes deep on well-known historical figures like the legendary squatter Captain Streeter, who fought over the land that now bears his name not just with rich landowners, but with the Potawatomi and some opportunistic scammers.
It's more of a Wild West story, I guess, much more interesting than just Streeter versus the rich investors.
But the wealthy and powerful were the ones who could file lawsuits and lobby lawmakers. The causes they took up determined much of the lakefront's destiny, in cases both large and small, like the fight over a makeshift lakefront ballpark once home to the Chicago White Stockings, a forerunner to the Cubs.
The property owners didn't like the baseball being played in front of their property, and so they got the local U.S. attorney to shut down the baseball club.
While both now live elsewhere, Merrill spent more than 20 years in Chicago, and Kearney grew up here. He says he came at the project
as the legally trained, to be sure, but native Chicagoan who really wanted to understand why various things are as they are, why Lakeshore Drive ends at Hollywood on the north side, or why the 1893 Columbian Exposition was in Jackson Park as opposed to what we now know as Grant Park.
In trying to answer some of those questions, Merrill says it became clear to them there's never been a single master plan guiding the lakefront's development.
It was a series of events that could have gone one way or gone the other way, but in Chicago it sort of ended up with a very, very splendid and happy outcome.
And a resource, the authors say, that demands continued vigilance so it might be preserved for future generations. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
And you can read an excerpt from Lakefront on our website. And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Yeah, Brandis, you really cannot take the lakefront for granted. And however it happened, I know Chicagoans are appreciative of that forever free and clear stipulation. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, theater returns to the Chicago Loop. Chris Jones has the latest and talks about his new role at the Chicago Tribune.
We need to overcome the structural deficit of the state. We haven't fully overcome that.
The state's finances get a vote of confidence, tension reigns at City Hall, and the Delta variant spreads. All that and more in Spotlight Politics. But first, some more of today's top stories. An alleged police torture survivor of former Chicago Police Commander John Burge is suing the city and others, including former Mayor Richard M. Daley. Jackie Wilson was wrongfully convicted of the murder of 2 Chicago police officers and spent decades in prison. He is also suing a host of current and former police, state's attorneys, and city officials, alleging they conspired to convict him for crimes they knew he did not commit and to cover up the acts of torture that led to his confession.
It's hard for me to deal with this. I should be mad, but if I allow myself to be mad, I will self-destruct and keep me up like a cancer. It's not time to be mad, it's time to heal, and I'm trying, Andrew. I'm trying.
And today marks 4 years that the Chicago Police Department has been without a labor contract. The last agreement between the city and police expired June 30th, 2017. Police officers have been working without a contract for that entire period as talks have stalled out over police reform provisions. Police officers still work under the rules of the expired agreement, which was first signed in 2012. Broadway in Chicago announces big plans for the fall and for next year. And of course, the actual Broadway reopened this week with a reboot of Springsteen on Broadway. Our next guest was there and can tell us about that in a minute. Plus, what's in store for Chicago theater. And joining us is the Chicago Tribune's chief theater critic and newly named editorial page editor, Chris Jones. Chris, welcome and congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Chris, as a longtime arts critic in this city, your new role as editorial page editor, replacing Kristen McQuarrie, who announced she's leaving, is this a job that you wanted?
Well, I'd expressed interest in being in writing editorials over the years. I think, I like writing opinion columns, as you know, and I think that the voice of the paper is a crucial part of Chicago. And I certainly had said, I think over a number of years, that I would be interested one day in maybe doing that. I didn't expect it to come down quite like this, but as everybody knows, the Tribune's been through a lot of changes in the last 3 or 4 weeks. A lot of people have left. There's been a lot of reshuffling and a lot of thinking about what we want to do next. And I think also some opportunities to try something in a bit of a different way. I think I'm an unusual choice for that job, but I'm going to give it my best shot. That's all any of us can do.
And traditionally, the voice of the Tribune editorial board has been a little bit right of center on most issues. Is that the point of view you plan to continue, at least for the editorial page, the other opinion columnist notwithstanding?
Well, I would describe myself as a moderate and a centrist. I do subscribe to some of the core values of that page that have existed for as long as I've been working there, such as pro-business, bringing the economic development to Chicago. I think that's very, very important. I think freedom of speech is very important. Individual personal liberty is very important. So all of those criteria I'm on board with. I'd like to hope under me that the page will be also a place of diverse viewpoints, including people that we don't typically hear from and maybe have not heard from in the past. And I think that's very important. And as we come out of the pandemic, I think there's also, frankly, a healing role for the page, in bringing people together. I really believe that everybody in Chicago, we all have to be brought along together, and we're all in this together. And it's been a divisive time and a very difficult time for a lot of people. And I'd like to be the place where we sort of work through that as a city.
And certainly has been an important voice in this city for many, many decades. And will you continue reviewing theater, reviewing arts performances with this new role as editorial page editor?
Yeah, I hope to do that. That's very important to the paper. There's a great tradition of that. It's also, frankly, one of my great joys in life to explore and explain to my readers the fantastic arts community that we have in Chicago, and I would hate to lose that opportunity. And so my intention, hopefully, is to be able to do all of this. The reality, we're a smaller paper now, and so I'm not unusual. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different jobs who are really sort of stretching themselves into things they haven't done before.
And those that are paying close attention to the Tribune, especially since the total takeover from Alden, they've seen the avalanche of buyouts, 40-plus people leaving in this recent round. What is your message to longtime readers and subscribers that worry how long the Tribune can even continue as a going concern?
Well, I think we're still there is number one message. And number two, that I'm hoping that we can be a place that still elevates the civic discourse. I think we've been in a place of late where the civic discourse has not been all that elevated, and I'd really like to see us get people thinking about big issues. I think some of the reasons for the buyouts had to do with what a lot of people are feeling at the end of this pandemic, which is, am I doing what I've always wanted to do? And maybe there's something else that I've not tried. And I think and that's partly about me too. And I think that's a very common feeling at the moment. And so I think that I'm hoping that people will stick with us. There are some sensational reporters in the newsroom. It's an incredible bench of talent even now. And the people who are there, frankly, Paris, are really dedicated to being there. They chose not to do this, and they're taking all the risks that you take in today's environment.
We'll look forward to continue to book them on shows like the Week in Review. Let's move over to the arts. When do you expect the Loop theater scene to get back to what it was, and what are the shows that Chicagoans should be looking for?
Well, I think we're seeing a little bit of a reopening this summer with a show like Teatro Zizzani, the circus show that's coming actually next week is the first performance. So I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's really going to be until October that the Loop is a little bit back to normal. There are shows like Frozen on the way, which a lot of families will want to go to. I think a lot of parents are scared that their kids aged out of Frozen during the pandemic. So I actually think they'll do very well, because people will be like, oh my God, we've got to see it now before they get too old. And there's Moulin Rouge is coming, Come From Away, which is a beautiful show about 9/11 is coming. There are 2 pre-Broadway tryouts, one in the fall, Paradise Square, which has already got a Broadway date. And as you know, Chicago has this great tradition of off-Broadway tryouts as a sort of an international leader in that. And that's going to be happening also in the middle of the fall. I don't think the fall will be completely normal, though. Like, I don't think people are going to see a normal fall. I think we're into 22 before we could really say that.
We'll look forward to that, and Teatro Zinzani, which is truly a spectacle. I have seen that. What about the off-loop theaters, the theaters that really make Chicago a great arts town, like the House Theater or the Annoyance Theater? What kind of shape are they in, and are they ready to bounce back?
Well, I think if you'd asked me that question 2 or 3 weeks ago, I would have said not very good shape. But what's happened is some of the federal money through the shuttered venue operators grants has been coming through. So some of those theaters you're mentioning have actually got a good infusion of federal cash that's designed to assuage their losses over the last 12 months due to the pandemic. We are seeing some venues and theaters and music clubs as well getting grants in the order of $5-6 million, which is a lot of money. And I think that actually is a game changer, because that's going to allow them to reopen and to sort of restart the production costs. And so there's definitely been a shift financially. And at the end of the day, this was so devastating to a lot of arts organizations, because they lost all their income in some cases, especially the commercial operators. So we're going to see now the chance to reboot. But I think, as I said earlier, a lot of people are wondering, is this what I really want to do with my life? And are we doing it the right way? You know, people don't want to go back in many cases. They want to go forward. They want change. And I think we're going to see a very interesting transition, you might say, back into recovery.
And speaking of transition, Bruce Springsteen and a reboot, he went to reboot his show on Broadway that you saw recently. Yeah. What was that experience like?
I thought it was indicative of how nothing is the same as it was before the pandemic. You know, Bruce did that show in 2017, I think, and he's now 71 years old. His mom has Alzheimer's. He talked about that from the stage. His dad has passed away, of course. And it's very much about the loss of his parents, which is, you might think, a strange thing for a Bruce Springsteen show, but he's also 4 years older, and he's clearly, in the pandemic, been thinking about these things. And so the show has become deeper and more, infinitely more moving, and he's more vulnerable than I've ever seen him before. And I think there are 2 things that are going to be different in the arts after the pandemic. One is that people are going to want to feel more deeply, because we still have to process all of the loss that so many of us have been through. Then the other thing I think that's going to be different is we're not going to take things for granted. So just sitting in a theater hearing Bruce Springsteen, I might have taken that for granted, perhaps. Not anymore. Now it feels, you know, the most glorious thing in the world.
And as I understand, there were some anti-vax hecklers out there.
There were a lot of anti-vax hecklers. I mean, I turned the corner of the block, and there were several hundred of them. You know, and there you have this issue that's going on in the arts, where some people are requiring vaccination. So Broadway generally has said that you have to be vaccinated to go to a show. So the Springsteen show had no masks, but theoretically, a guarantee that everybody was vaccinated. But that doesn't sit well with some people, of course, because it collides with their sense of individual liberty. And then in Chicago, we're not seeing that as much yet, anyway. But I think that's, of course, a big decision that people have to make. Am I going to require vaccination? And then how are people going to prove it? So in New York, they have a lot of people anyway, have a digital record of their vaccinations. We don't really have that in Illinois, so it's far more complicated.
We'll have to see how theater companies in Chicago deal with that. All right, Chris Jones, thank you for joining us, and best of luck to you in your new role.
Thanks a lot.
And up next, a special meeting of the City Council is called for Friday. Find out why with our Spotlight Politics team, so stay with us.
An emergency city council meeting called for Friday as alderpeople push Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Police Superintendent David Brown to take additional steps to reduce violent crime. Meanwhile, the state of Illinois' credit outlook just got rosier. A landmark criminal justice bill goes into effect, and the spread of the Delta variant prompts questions about whether mask mandates and COVID restrictions should return. A lot to get to. Welcome back, our Spotlight Politics team of Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So, Heather, let's start with you, please. How exactly did this special council meeting come together?
Well, 19 aldermen signed a letter calling a city council meeting that is significantly more than the 3 aldermen state law requires for this kind of emergency meeting. And they want answers from Superintendent David Brown about how he plans to tamp down violent crime during the 4th of July weekend, which is just around the corner and is typically one of the most violent weekends in Chicago. Now, Mayor Lightfoot did not want a special city council meeting. She says that the aldermen have been fully briefed on the plan, and if they don't know what's going on, that's really up to them. And she put out a pretty blistering statement accusing the aldermen who forced the meeting of using public safety as a, quote, political wedge issue, end quote. And what's interesting about that is that many of those aldermen who signed on to the call for the meeting are among her closest allies on the city council, so tensions are certainly running high.
Now, this also comes as the mayor and many alderpeople continue to spar publicly, including that high-profile showdown between Lightfoot and alderperson Jeanette Taylor last week in city council chambers. Here's Mayor Lightfoot yesterday on Chicago Tonight.
I think that we have very strong relationships with a good working majority of the aldermen, but procedurally, 2 people can shut down the entire process. And unfortunately, historically, that has been used very sparingly, but we're seeing it being used more by people who, frankly, want to turn the legislative process into some kind of stage performance rather than doing the work of the people.
Now, we should also mention that we also had alderperson Jeanette Taylor here on the show Monday night as well. Paris, you know, all this tension in recent weeks, it's been framed as Council Wars 2.0. What's the impact on the important city business that has to get done, but also the public image of Chicago's elected officials?
Well, it's probably a misnomer to call it Council Wars 2.0 because it's not like the dynamic between a block of white aldermen in the 80s and the city's first African-American mayor, Harold Washington. This is just a much different dynamic in city council, and I think with the aldermen calling this special meeting, I mean, everybody wants to look like they're doing something about violence, and what can aldermen do? Well, I guess they can call hearings and have the police superintendent testify. It's also, as the mayor said, I mean, it's a political cudgel that they can use against the mayor. There's aldermen like Ray Lopez, who you just saw, alderperson Jeanette Taylor. There's alderperson Ed Burke, who clearly is not a fan of the current mayor, and they can call a meeting like this over her opposition saying, hey, we're not afraid of you. You know, we're not a pliant city council. And some might look at that and say it's not council wars, but it's democracy in action, and democracy can be pretty messy. So, I mean, when there's a big legislative initiative like a budget that the mayor has, and she doesn't have 26 votes, that's when we'll know. But we're not at that point yet.
Amanda, there's also this ongoing battle over what is known as aldermanic prerogative, which was put to the test last week. Remind us what that is and why it's back in the headlines.
Aldermanic prerogative is really just that. It gives aldermen a whole lot of sway over what goes on in their wards. They have the ability to sign on or to sign off on things like what came about last week, signs in their wards. This was part of the plan that Mayor Lori Lightfoot wanted to move, make it more, these are the rules you have to follow, put it under the city's business administrative arm. And instead, aldermen said, no, we want to keep that ability to determine when these signs can go in our wards and when they shouldn't. And this is a big deal for 2 reasons. Number one, the mayor ran on eliminating a whole lot of that aldermanic prerogative because it's been abused with signs, kind of a big blinking sign right here, referencing, Paris just mentioned, council member Ed Burke, who of course is facing indictment for allegedly not approving some signage because he wanted instead money to be kicked back to his law firm.
And Heather, we'll have to talk about the pandemic, of course, growing concerns over the COVID-19 Delta variant. Now, the WHO, the World Health Organization, now recommending that even fully vaccinated people wear masks indoors. But the city's top doctor says that that's not necessarily necessary in Chicago. How should we make sense of this latest messaging?
Well, the city's health department has been in lockstep with recommendations from the Centers for Disease Control. And the Centers for Disease Control say, look, the Delta variant is certainly very concerning. It was the variant first discovered in India that helped fuel the huge rise in cases there. But all of the vaccines that are on offer, the Pfizer-BioNTech, the Moderna, the Johnson & Johnson, appear to be significantly effective in stopping it. So people who are fully vaccinated, that's 2 weeks post the final dose, are protected from the Delta variant. So that's why those people don't need to wear masks. If you're not fully vaccinated, all of the recommendations is that you should be wearing masks. And of course, everybody should be wearing masks in some settings like hospitals and public transportation. So the city is following the federal guidance. The worldwide guidance has changed a little bit, but because America is so much more vaccinated than basically any other country at this point, it's a little bit different here on the ground.
So moving over to state business, this week Moody's upgraded Illinois' credit rating for the first time in more than 20 years. Here's Governor J.B. Pritzker talking about the state's finances.
Aid from Congress was not used to balance the budget in 2022. That's a fallacy. Whoever is saying that has got it wrong. The truth is that we had both increased revenue from economic activity in the state that we didn't expect. I think nobody expected the kind of upsurge of economic activity that we had. That's part of it. And the other is we held the line on spending. That's hugely important. So basically, mostly flat spending across state government other than education, vital social services.
Amanda, how big of a deal is this credit upgrade from Moody's?
It's a big deal considering that Illinois had been on the brink, had it gone in the other direction on reaching below investment grade status. Illinois been the lowest credit rated state of anywhere in the nation. So getting a notch, this is a big deal. First time in some 23 years. The last time instead Illinois has seen a series, dozens of downgrades. The last time that there was an upgrade like this, which by the way should save taxpayers money when Illinois goes to the bond market, was back when George Ryan was governor. The Bulls were really good. They won a championship for the last time of their six-peat was that year. So this is truly very significant. That said, Illinois not out of the woods. Illinois still has a relatively low credit rating compared to other states. And while the state was recognized for being prudent, Moody's pointed out that if legislators give into temptation to say skip a pension payment, which by the way is something that Governor J.B. Pritzker had proposed during his tenure, that given an $140 billion, yes, with a B, unfunded pension liability, that Illinois could see things go back down again.
That's how you know it was a long time ago. George Ryan was governor and the Bulls were really, really good. Paris, we've heard for so many years, as Amanda just mentioned, about Illinois' beleaguered finances. Is the state finally turning a corner here?
I think the Bulls are going to be good again, too. I think all that goes around comes around. Well, yeah, as Amanda said, it's certainly something to be semi-proud of, but not to be the Debbie Downer here. The pension liability, depending on what measurement you believe, is either $140 billion or over $200 billion, and the state puts $7 billion, $8 billion a year, about 30% of its budget, and it still barely makes a dent in that liability. And as the credit rating agencies pointed out, don't expect those ratings to go up a whole lot more until something is done about pensions. The perennial question, whether it be more tax revenue dedicated specifically to paying down those liabilities or doing some kind of reform that's within constitutional bounds, which doesn't look like there really is any, or just stretching out how long it's going to take to pay off those liabilities. Right now, 30 years, 40 years, maybe it has to be 50 years. But beyond that, the state still has, if not the worst, one of the worst pension liability situations in the country. And so it can balance a budget from year to year, but that long-term cloud still looms.
Now, the 2022 Illinois primary, that's exactly 1 year away after legislators moved it to June starting next year. Heather, why this move and what's the political fallout going to be here?
Well, the simple answer is that the census is late and that the new congressional districts won't be ready for people to pull nomination papers and get their campaigns in gear. So everybody decided to just push it back and let that census data flow in. We now expect it in about a month, mid-August, a little bit less than that, a little bit more, and that will allow people to get going. So it's just really to give everybody breathing room as the census was delayed by first the pandemic and then court challenges brought by former President Donald Trump.
And, you know, Amanda, while we're on it, what do we know about the governor's race?
Yeah, it's going to be time for him to make a declaration soon. When he was last on Chicago Tonight, we asked him, are you planning to run again? He said, I haven't decided. I've got to have some serious talks with my family. That said, he had put $35 million, which to him maybe not all that much, but still, that's a pretty hefty chunk of change when it comes to spending on ads and what have you for a campaign. So it certainly seems as if he's gearing up. And whoa, what a tizzy it would be for the Democratic Party if at this point he were to back out. So I'm expecting that he will be needing to make some sort of public decision sometime soon, but really all the bets are that that is just he didn't want to say that he was running publicly and that we will get that, and this delay in the primary date gave him a little bit of breathing room.
So in D.C., House of Representatives today formed a committee to investigate the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, but getting only 2 votes from Republicans, Wyoming's Liz Cheney and Illinois' Adam Kinzinger. Paris, what do you think Kinzinger's calculus is here? He has been a frequent Trump critic, but also been floated as a potential candidate for statewide office.
Well, the House Speaker gets to appoint 8 members to this select committee to investigate what happened January 6th. If the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy wants to go along with this, he gets to appoint 5. But, the fact that only 2 House Republicans voted for this committee to get to the bottom of what happened that day when democracy was under threat, when their own lives were under threat, it's pretty staggering. And that tells me that the House Minority Leader probably won't want to be a part of this. But it would make sense for the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, she is a Democrat, but it would make sense to put a Republican like Kinzinger on a commission like that to give it the credibility of bipartisanship. So whatever they come up with can't just be dismissed as a partisan witch hunt or anything like that. And Congressman Kinzinger has expressed interest in doing something like that. And then there's Liz Cheney in Wyoming. But the calculus is, I think they've just gone for broke here. They're the holdouts in their party saying, we need to rid the party of the lies, we need to rid the party of the extremism and move on from Donald Trump. And clearly, the vast majority of their party is not with them. So how does that impact their political careers? I don't know, but it would be very interesting to see if one of them, if not both of them, gets put on that commission.
And Heather, circling back to city news before I let you all go, it's been 4 years now since Chicago's police union's contract has expired with the city. How has that impacted policing in the city, and is there any sign that the 2 sides will be able to come to an agreement anytime soon?
Nope, there's no deal in sight. It expired exactly 4 years ago today. It is the longest contract negotiation now in the city's history. And the issue is twofold. One, the city wants reforms, and the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7 does not want reforms. Both sides are dug in. And even though the city is prepared to give officers a significant amount of retroactive pay to make up for pay raises that they've missed over the past 4 years, there seems to be no way in sight to break this logjam because the mayor won't endorse a deal that doesn't include significant reforms, and the police union won't accept one that does, which leaves us pretty much nowhere.
Right where we are. Amanda, 30 seconds. That procedural hold was lifted today on the Chicago Public Schools elected school board. What are the latest developments? What's next?
So this was the hold that was put on by the measure sponsor. So while sometimes you can play tricks and maybe somebody who's against a bill will use this hold to prevent it from ever becoming law, that's not what this was. It does come after State Representative Delia Ramirez, that sponsor, met with Mayor Lori Lightfoot last week. Not a whole lot of news out of it. I don't think either side is really budging, but it means it's going to the governor, who said that he will sign it. So CPS on the way to an elected school board.
Okay, more to talk about there on the next Spotlight Politics. Thanks to Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. And you can find out more about the stories discussed tonight with our Spotlight Politics team by visiting our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And a note before we go. A longtime member of the Chicago Tonight and WTTW family is transitioning away from full-time work today after 45 years. Michelle McKenzie Voigt came to WTTW in 1975 as an administrative assistant and moved through a wide variety of positions. You may have seen her on our auction or pledge breaks. She was an associate director for this very program from the day it went on air in 1984 until 2010, when she became manager of production scheduling. She's been dubbed the Swiss Army knife of WTTW, true story, for her versatility, which includes being the station's grammar guru. Thank you, Michelle. Now she will be spending more time with her husband of 42 years, Don Voigt. They met here on the job, as well as her son, daughter-in-law, and new grandson. Michelle, of course, you have been an integral part of the Chicago Tonight programming from the very beginning. Thank you for all you've done over these many years, and enjoy your retirement. Lots of baby snuggles, I wish, for you.
Absolutely. Your little grandbaby she's going to get to see for the first time. And let's not forget that Michelle McKenzie Voigt is a wonderful actor, a theater actor that has performed in venues around town. And she certainly is a legend and an icon here at Chicago Tonight. And I know full well that if anything I say right now is grammatically incorrect, I will hear about it from her. And as you are, Brandis, I am thankful for that.
Thankful for her as well. Yeah, and I think she was a bit of a vocalist. I heard of a holiday party where the two of you sang a duet. And that's our show.
Baby, it's cold outside.
That's it. That's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices. Please. Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.